I think it's really important to almost think of this like a tree, like a diagram tree of we have strikeouts, walks, and damage at the top of this tree. And now we want to break these down into branches that have little process-oriented numbers or benchmarks that we want to look at that are going to drive those strikeouts or drive those lower walks. Welcome to another episode of the Mound Visit podcast. My name is Jared Gaynor. I'm going to be flying solo today. Josh has an away series and was unable to record, so you guys are stuck with me. We're going to talk about how to evaluate yourself as a pitcher while also understanding what are the things that I need to work on and push forward. There are so many ways to evaluate yourself from a stuff standpoint, your stats, your mechanics, all of those things. Today, I want to keep things really, really simple for you. We're going to boil things down to 3 categories of how to evaluate yourself as a pitcher on the field. So we're not diving into mechanics and those sorts of things. We're purely talking about in-game performance and how to know what area you are good at, as well as what area you need to push forward, and give you some ideas of an area of focus from a player development and player plan standpoint. Success boils down to 3 categories on the mound: your ability to miss bats, aka strikeouts, your ability to limit free bases, also known as walks, and your ability to limit damage, home runs, extra base hits, things of those nature. If you are really good at these categories, you are going to be a successful pitcher. These are the things that lead to the good outcomes. Now, it is important to understand that not everyone is going to be great at 3 of these categories. The really good pitchers are, but we're talking about the top of the line, the best pitchers at whatever level you're at. They are good at all 3 of these things. But there are a lot of really, really good pitchers that are good at 2 of these 3 things. Now, if you're only good at 1 of these out of the 3, then we definitely got some work to do. But the goal should be to be at least average or above average in 2 of these 3 categories, and that will put you in a great position to succeed on the mound. I'm super excited to announce a course that I'm coming out with called Pitch Design U. It will cover all things pitching development, including pitch movement fundamentals, how to throw every pitch, and analytics behind all pitch types. The course is set to launch on June 10th. Between now and then, I will be sharing details of the course weekly to everyone on the waitlist. Check out the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. So let's talk about strikeouts. Average strikeout rate in Division I baseball is right around 20%. For pro baseball, it's around 22-23% in the major leagues. So that's how you're going to evaluate yourself when it comes to your ability to miss bats and get strikeouts. So if you're well below that, let's just say you're below 18, 17%, and you're getting down towards, 14, 15, 16%, that's an area that is probably a weakness for you, or it's just not a strength of yours on the mound. Once you start getting to 23, 24, 25% plus, you are starting to get into the territory of being a guy that really has the ability to strike batters out. When it comes to walks, the average walk rate in Division I baseball right now is around 11%. It's also around that in the minor leagues. At the major league level, it's closer to that 8.5%. So I always like to evaluate yourself to your peers, but we also want to compare yourselves to where you want to go. So if you want to be a professional baseball player, you need to be judging yourself on that scale as well. From a walk rate standpoint, we absolutely want to be in the single digits. If we start to get to 10% plus, I would say that's an area that we need to start working on and focusing on. You start getting below 8%, 7%, 6%, 5%, you are in elite territory. Like George Kirby, for example, I think I saw someone post, I want to say it was Codify, the other day, that his walk rate for his career so far is 3.5%, which is just absolutely ridiculous. That is a super, super low walk rate. And he's also starting to strike out more guys. He struck out 12 against the Diamondbacks this last week. So when you pair that with low walks, now you're starting to get into elite territory. Damage. Now this one is going to vary greatly from level to level. And depending on what stat you're using, at the amateur levels, you might not have as many advanced metrics for damage numbers like expected WOBA or expected ISO. So using something as simple as slugging percentage or ISO, those things will work just fine, just to give you at least an idea of where you need to be. And then also home run rate is a good one to look at. But once again, if you're at the high school level, I don't know what the average home run rate would be for that. I do know for Division I baseball, it is close to that 2% mark. For the major leagues, it's around 2.7%, I want to say, off the top of my head. So obviously, the lower the better for that number. Now, circling back to not needing to be, amazing at all three to be a good pitcher. As long as we're good at least two of these three things, you can still be successful on the mound. For guys that aren't strikeout guys, it's okay. It's okay if you don't miss a lot of bats. We just have to really make sure that we limit free bases and we limit damage. Now, on the flip side, if you are a strikeout guy, you might be able to get away with a few more walks and have a higher walk rate, assuming that the damage is low and that you are missing enough bats. So there's always this balance of, okay, if I have a weakness, I need to make sure the other side of the coin is a really big strength to even it out. Now, the guys that are really, really good, they're able to do everything extremely well. And that's the goal for you, right? Like you'll get into the place where you can develop some of these tools and start to elevate your game to where there aren't a lot of weaknesses. But the truth of the matter is there's few and far between pitchers like that. And even those guys that are at the elite level, they're pushing themselves to be as good as they can and to get every ounce of advantage out of themselves. So let's break these down a little bit. It's pretty obvious, right? Like we want to strike guys out. We want to limit free bases. We want to limit damage. It's like, okay, Jared, obviously that's what I want to do. Now, how does that break down? How do I know exactly what I need to focus on? And what is the cause for why I'm not striking guys out or why I'm walking too many? All of those things. And I think it's really important to almost think of this like a tree, like a diagram tree of we have strikeouts, walks, and damage at the top of this tree. And now we want to break these down into branches that have little process-oriented numbers or benchmarks that we want to look at that are going to drive those strikeouts or drive those lower walks. So let's start with strikeouts. There's 3 or 4 main things that ultimately lead to strikeouts. The number one thing, in my opinion, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is simply getting to 2 strikes. It sounds so simple. It sounds silly when you say it out loud. It's like, of course, if I'm in 0-2, 1-2 counts, I'm probably going to strike out more guys. But that is why it's so important. If you get to 2 strikes, the strikeout rate goes through the roof. So the average percentage of batters that are in 0-2, 1-2 counts at the Division I level is around 35%. At the major league level, it's around 40%. So let me say that again. Division I baseball, batters are in 0-2 or 1-2 counts 35% of the at-bats. That might be more than what you're thinking. So about a third of the at-bats, or even more than a third of the at-bats, are in 0-2 and 1-2 counts on average. At the major league level, it is 40%. So if you look at your numbers and you see that you're only, at 0-2 or 1-2 counts 28, 29% of the time, like that's your low-hanging fruit right there, is finding a way to get to 2 strikes more often. If you're a guy that's 40% plus, there's a good chance that you're striking out a lot of guys. And if you're not, then there's something else going on there to where you're not using stuff well with 2 strikes, or your location is off, or something is going on. So that's step 1. We got to be able to get to 2 strikes more frequently. Step 2, and this ties into getting to 2 strikes more often, is you have to have good stuff. The better my stuff is, the more swing and miss I'm going to get. And swing and miss is the number 1 predictor of strikeouts. So once again, it's not as simple as just saying, okay, get more swing and miss. We have to figure out why you're not getting misses or how we can increase them more. And improving your stuff is a really, really good way to do this, whether it's increasing your velocity, improving the movement on your pitches, figuring out what is the optimal arsenal for you. So are you a north-south guy to where you're going more 4 seams and more depthy pitches like curveballs and maybe a splitter? Are you east-west where you're going sinker, slider, cutter? Figuring out what your arsenal is and figuring out what your strengths are from that standpoint, understanding how to build your arsenal accordingly is going to be really important for you to building out good stuff and understanding how your stuff is going to play the best. So that's the step 2, is understanding your stuff and maximizing it to the best of your ability. The next is pitch usage and sequencing. So oftentimes guys will have good stuff. They might even be getting to 2 strikes a decent amount, but because they're not using their stuff optimally, they might not be getting as many strikeouts. So let's just say your fastball is your lowest swing and miss percentage pitch, but you're throwing it 50% of the time with 2 strikes. Of course, your strikeout rates are going to be lower because you're not using your best swing and miss stuff when you want to swing and miss, which is in those 2 strike counts. So understand how to use your stuff and understanding what are your best swing and miss pitches, what are your best called strike pitches, so you know how to get there early. Or if you're trying to, let's just say you're really good at throwing backdoor sinkers and you get a lot of called strikes on that, understanding that maybe in an 0-2 or 1-2 count, that's when I want to use that pitch. So maximizing the usage to where it's going to feed into those swing and misses or those called strikes is going to be really important. And then also understanding how to sequence your stuff. So I did a post recently on Tanner Houck for the Boston Red Sox. He is having an incredible start to the year. He's got like a 1.5 ERA so far. He is an east-west pitcher. So he throws sinker, splitter, and a sweeper, and occasionally a cutter. Typically, those types of pitchers do not perform as well against lefties. There's pretty severe platoon splits just because the batter can see the ball a little bit better. This year, Tanner is doing an incredible job against lefties. He's actually performing better against lefties than he is righties right now. And it's because he has just mastered his sweeper and splitter combination. He is just keeping them guessing with pitches running in and pitches running away, and he is tunneling them really, really well. So because of that, he's striking out more batters than he has in the past, and he's limiting damage as a result. And the last thing for strikeouts, and this goes into the next category of walks as well, is location. Throwing your pitches to the optimal locations for swing and miss. So breaking balls typically is going to be down to the glove side. Changeups and splitters is going to be down to the arm side, or even just down in general over the plate. Four seamers up, and then for sinkers. So sinkers aren't really swing and miss pitches, and I don't advise that you try to use it as a swing and miss pitch. So if you are going to throw a sinker in those 2 strike counts, your best bet is typically going to be for a called strike, which means you need to throw it to the glove side. So if you're a right-handed pitcher, you're going to be throwing the sinker away to a lefty, away to a righty or into a lefty. That is how you're going to maximize that pitch in 2 strike counts. Okay, moving on to walks. Once again, it's great to know that, hey, I walk a lot of guys, but we now need to go to the tree diagram again, and we need to break this down of what ultimately leads to walks and how I can limit them. And these are some of my, my favorite process-oriented stats that I have shared a good amount of on social media. Number one, and this is the most popular stat around, is first pitch strikes. It is so obvious, yet so important that throwing first pitch strikes is going to limit your walks. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I want to say, historically speaking, after an 0-1 count, your walk rate is about 5% with a 30% K rate. After a 1-0 count, the walk rate jumps up to like 18% and the strikeout rate is 16 or 17%. So there is a dramatic swing from one pitch to the next purely by just throwing a first pitch strike. Now, once again, first pitch strikes. Obviously, you're trying to throw first pitch strikes. No one's trying to throw a ball and get behind 1-0. So what you need to understand is, what is my best strike pitch? And that is what you want to throw more often early in the count. For a lot of guys, it's going to be a fastball. But maybe it's not. Maybe it is an off-speed pitch. Maybe you have a really good feel for your slider and you can flip it in there for a strike consistently. Use that pitch early in the count. Another thing to understand is your targeting. Some guys try to get too nitpicky on 0-0 counts to where they're trying to hit the black. They're trying to go down and away perfectly to a location, and they're probably not going to get a swing. So if they don't execute this perfectly, it's just going to be a ball. Set your sights more middle early in the count, especially in 0-0 counts, and just give yourself a bigger margin for error. If he swings the bat and puts the ball in play, like that's a win too. Having a ball put in play on the first pitch, even if he goes for a hit, more times than not, that is going to be a good result for us because we're attacking the zone, we're limiting our pitch count, and we got 8 other fielders that can help us behind us, or 7 others rather behind us. So that's a really simple thing that I think a lot of guys can apply, is just aim middle 0-0, and then also use your best in zone pitches early in the count. Next stat that you want to focus on is early and ahead. So this is my favorite stat. I've shared this many times. And early is anytime the ball is put in play on an 0-0 count, 1-0 count, 1-1, or 0-1. So basically anytime where it's 3 pitches or less, ball put in play, minus 2-0. So we're not counting a 2-0 count for this. But anything else, 3 pitches or less, ball put in play. Doesn't matter what the result is. It can be a hit, it can be an error, he can be out. It doesn't matter. And ahead is anytime you're in an 0-2 or a 1-2 count. So this is what we talked about earlier for strikeouts. 35% is average for college baseball. 40% is average for Division I baseball. Now, for the early and ahead percentage number, you'll just simply add the amount of earlies you had plus the aheads, and you'll divide it by batters faced. The goal is to be at least 70%. So college baseball is right around 68, 69%. Major League Baseball is right around 72%. So 70% is the benchmark. The elite guys are in the 75 to 80% range. And when you're doing that, when you're just attacking the zone, inducing early contact, or getting to 2 strikes often, good things are going to happen. And before I move forward, the first pitch strikes, I didn't say the averages. The goal for that one is to be at 60% or higher. College average is around 57, 58%. Pro ball is right around 60, 61%. So we want to be at least 60% or higher. And if we have a high first pitch strike percentage, it's going to ultimately lead to a higher early and ahead percentage number because the odds are greater in our favor of getting an early ball in play or getting to 2 strikes if we throw a first pitch strike. Another stat for walks that I really enjoy looking at is swing percentage. And what I like about this one is it's an aggressive stat for pitchers to think about. The goal is to create as many swings as we can. If we get the batter to swing the bat often, he's then going to start chasing our pitches outside of the zone because we have proven that we are in the strike zone and we are attacking him. It is a very aggressive mindset stat, which I love. Average is right around 45% for swing percentage. My goal for a lot of guys that have struggled with this, or walk guys, I try to get them to 50%. Your goal is every other pitch, I want the batter to swing the bat. And the goal of this is because I'm trying to get him to swing the bat, that means that I am going to be attacking the strike zone. And what's great is if he doesn't swing, because I'm attacking the strike zone, it's going to be a called strike. So it's a win-win. I'm either getting a swing for a miss, a foul ball, a ball in play, or if he doesn't swing, it's a called strike and it's still a win for me. So that's a really important stat that you can track because it directly correlates to walk rate. And it's also just a nice framework and change of mindset that guys can have of getting out of the traditional, first pitch strikes, you're falling behind 2-0. It's like, you know what? Hey, I'm 2-0 on this guy, but I have an opportunity to get a swing right here. So I'm going to focus on getting a swing. In order to do that, I'm going to attack the strike zone. So that could be a good one for you coaches or players to use if the other stats have been either not worked or they kind of get in the head of the player and aren't working the way you want them to. Another thing for walks is to look at the strike percentage by pitch type. So if you have TrackMan or you're in pro baseball or any of those things, you can look at in-zone percentage, which I would look at as well. But for most amateurs, they're not going to have access to their in-zone numbers, but they will have access to their strike percentage numbers. So we want to be at least 60% or higher for all of our pitches. For fastballs, ideally, we're at 65% or higher. And one thing that's really interesting that I noticed in Major League Baseball, I did a little bit of a study on this, is pitchers that have a fastball in-zone percentage of 55% or higher, their walk rates are dramatically lower than guys that have them below 55%, especially for starting pitchers. So if we start seeing guys that are around 50%, or sorry, I just said in zone. I had in zone in my mind. So I'll go on this rant for a second on in zone since I have it on my mind. If our in zone percentage is below 50%, that is a really big cause for concern, especially for a starting pitcher. And I would be willing to guess that their walk rate is very high. So that needs to be step one as a starter. You really got to have an in zone percentage of 55%. So going to strike percentage, it would be 65% for the strike percentage. If we're below 60%, really honestly below 62% with the fastball, that is a cause for concern that we really got to elevate. Other pitches, off-speed pitches, we want to make sure those are as close as 60% or higher as well. As long as we have at least one that's 60% or higher, along with our fastball at 65, we're probably okay. Once pitches start getting below 55% strikes, that's when it starts to get a little concerning to where the pitch is kind of flip of a coin of whether it's going to be successful or not. So we really want to focus on driving that and breaking that down by pitch. So as you can see with walks, it's multi-layered. There are many factors that could lead to a guy walking guys. Maybe his first pitch strikes are low, maybe early in the head's low, swings are low. If all of these things are low, which is common in some cases where guys have high walk rates, I would focus on whichever one the pitcher gravitates more towards, because we want to make sure that they are working on things that they are motivated by and that they're able to see progress by. Because all of these stats, if they improve any of these stats, their walk rate is probably going to improve. So maybe for one guy, they like the early and ahead concept. They like the idea of tracking that number, and that's what you're going to use for that guy. Maybe another guy, he really likes swing percentage and the mindset it gives him of trying to create swings. Maybe that's the stat you use. I would really encourage whatever stat you're using to try to drive the walk rate lower. Focus solely on that one, just so you're sending a consistent message to the player and you're not going back and forth with, one day, the goal is swing percentage and you're like, oh, your swing percentage is good, but your early and ahead was not very good. So let's focus on the early and ahead this week. It's just going to be very confusing for the player, and you want to make sure that you are sending a consistent message to him. So I would advise doing that for at least an extended period of time of 4 to 6 weeks, tracking that one stat and see how that is correlating with the walks. Moving on to damage. This one, once again, it's not hard to quantify, I guess. There's many numbers. There's slugging percentage, there's ISO, expected ISO, all of those things. The thing with this, though, is it's tough to know what is driving it. It's usually falling behind in counts. It's, leaving pitches middle. So I would say it's falling behind really and location. Like those are the two main drivers of damage. So it comes back to a lot of the things we talked about with walks and strikeouts. If we're getting ahead of guys, we're improving our stuff, we're improving our locations, damage should be lower. Another obvious thing that is going to lower your damage numbers is inducing ground balls. So not everybody's a ground ball pitcher, though. Like if we think about our north-south guys, our guys that are big four-seam guys, top of the zone, they're going to give up more fly balls. And as a result, they're probably going to give up a few more home runs. And that's kind of the trade-off. If we're going to strike out more guys and they're limiting free bases, we can live with a little bit more damage being done. Now, if it's a Tanner Houck type of pitcher where he's a sinker guy, he creates a lot of weak contact, ground balls, we need to make sure that ground ball rate is staying up and it's closer to 55, 60%. If we're doing that, probably going to be successful, and we're limiting fly balls, which means we're probably limiting damage. There's not a lot of damage that can be done on ground balls. So that's a very obvious number, but you got to understand who your pitcher is and understand, is he a ground ball type of pitcher to where that is the goal, or is he a guy that is pitching at the top of the zone a lot and is probably going to be creating more fly balls? So this is just a simple framework for you guys of three main things. Once again, I think for each category, try to really focus on what is the low-hanging fruit for that guy. So coming back to strikeouts, is it a stuff issue? Is his velocity poor? Is his off-speed poor? Does it not really matter that he's getting ahead and he's attacking the strike zone? He just has no swing and miss in his arsenal. So we really need to maximize his arsenal, whether it's velocity, developing a pitch, whatever it might be. Or is it just his stuff's good, he's just leaving things middle, or he's falling behind and he's just not ever in these strikeout opportunities, or he's not executing his pitches to get those swing and misses. So understanding where they are with that. For walks, coming back to that, what is the one main driver for them? Like I said, there's probably multiple things. If a guy's walking a lot of guys, there's probably multiple things that he's not doing well. So try to keep it simple. Induce swings if that's something he gravitates towards, and maybe it's his fastball strike percentage is really low. We're focusing on attacking with our fastball in zone, and we're focusing on creating swings. Those are the two main things. Damage, maybe it's just simply getting ahead. So damage doesn't need a ton of attention necessarily. If we're taking care of these other things in the other categories, we're probably going to be okay. So that would be my advice for you, for whether you're a coach or whether you're a player, of how to think about this framework. Now, I didn't dive into the actual plans or the exact detail of how you would structure these throwing programs, these bullpens, these drills, all of those things, because that could be a whole nother episode, or that could be probably multiple episode series of how you would go about that. But I hope this gives you a clear idea of how to break down what is the pitcher's low-hanging fruit, what do we need to focus on moving forward, and then we can create a plan accordingly. So if you do have any questions, or you have a specific player that you're kind of racking your brain around and you can't figure out what you need to do, let me know. I'd be happy to take a look. And it really just keeps things simple, right? With these three main frameworks of damage, walks, and strikeouts, we can figure out pretty quickly what is the low-hanging fruit for these guys. And before I go on too much of a tangent here, I just want to circle back to the fact that ERA and those main performance numbers, they matter, right? That is how we judge and evaluate overall performance, because runs is what wins and loses games. But it's really important that we're focusing on things that ultimately lead to a good ERA or lead to giving up fewer runs. And I believe that it's these three categories, and it's the processes underneath these categories that is ultimately going to lead that. The second we start focusing on just the outcome and not the process, that's when we're going to get in trouble, because we're not going to have any consistency with our plan. We're not going to know where to start. We're not going to know what's going wrong. We're just going to be bouncing left to right all over the place, trying to figure out what it is, and we're never going to have a consistent plan or approach. But I promise you, more times than not, if you follow this process of these three main categories, you are going to be where you want to be. There might be one-offs where your process is great and you have a bad game, but more times than not, you are going to be going in the right direction, especially as a team. If this is a philosophy for your team or your organization, you're going to be in a very good place by the end of the season. So I hope this was helpful. As always, please send me a message with any questions, and I'd be happy to help.